I've been doing psychiatry now in the triad since I got out of residency a few years ago. So I've done just about everything you can do, inpatient, outpatient consults, legal consulting, medical director, IRB chair, things like that. I've done some research and kind of known for the homocysteine theory of depression and known for integrative therapies and use of vitamins in depression, known for neuroprotective measures and also for chronic traumatic encephalopathy and head injury.
Welcome, everyone, to the One Moment Podcast. I am your boy and your co-host, KO, K-Dog, or just Kevin. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
I am a licensed professional in the state of North Carolina. I am a licensed clinical addiction specialist and a certified clinical supervisor, all in the state of North Carolina. Now, with that being said, here on the One Moment Podcast, we talk about mental health, substance use, suicide prevention. We talk about anything related to healthcare. It doesn't matter. Okay. You have a potential to be triggered during any of our episodes, whether it's this episode, whether it's another one you are watching or listening to. So if you're in the US, Canada, or any of its related territories, please utilize your resources. You have 988, which is the National Suicide and Crisis Hotline. You also have 911, and you can also go to a local crisis center or a local hospital. Now, if you're in the UK, Australia, Russia, Japan, Taiwan, anywhere else, Africa, we just learned yesterday we're being watched in Africa, and you are being triggered and you need help, please go to a local emergency department. Use a local healer in your village if you are, if that is your deal. Utilize local resources, please, please, please. Okay. Now, that being said, since we got the good stuff out the way, okay, now let's get to the better stuff. We have an amazing young man on our show today. His name is Dr. Andy Farah. Now, let me preface this because I didn't know who he was. I'm talking to a colleague one day, and she was like, Kev, do you not realize that is Dr. Farah? And I'm like, well, okay, who was that? That was my response and my look. And she was like, really, Kevin? You really don't know? And I'm like, yeah, it's like I have no earthly idea. And that was about 2 years ago. And she was telling me about him, and I've had the privilege and honor of working with this young man for the last 2 years. So with that being said, I'm not going to take up too much of his time because I know who he is. Trevor knows this much. So I'm going to let Dr. Andy Farah, also known as just Dr. Farah, introduce himself and tell the public what he wants them to know about him.
You are so kind, Kevin. I tell you, that's such a lovely introduction. I was, binge listening to your podcast. I thought, my goodness, I don't think I can live up to these standards. You've had some amazing guests on there, just on here. And thanks for the great work you and Trevor are doing. It's just because you're right. We always talk about removing the stigma of mental health and improving awareness, but you're actually doing stuff. You're actually doing things. So yes, I guess I've been doing psychiatry now in the triad since I got out of residency a few years ago. So I've done just about everything you can do, inpatient, outpatient consults, legal consulting, medical director, IRB chair, things like that. I've done some research and kind of known for the homocysteine theory of depression and known for integrative therapies and use of vitamins in depression, known for neuroprotective measures and also for chronic traumatic encephalopathy and head injury work. And that's sort of this prompted my book on Ernest Hemingway, which kind of was a wonderful book as far as it. I didn't make a lot of money on it. Somebody made money on it, but I didn't make money on it. But it sent me around the world. I got to lecture. The great thing about Hemingway conferences is they happen in wonderful places like Paris and Venice and Spain. So that's another area of specialty, is kind of looking at the lost generation of writers and talking about their psychiatric and neurological issues. So yeah, so I think I've done about all you can do. And I wish I could do more, but these day jobs tend to get in the way, rather than the fun stuff like this. Yeah.
Man, I love it. I love it. And that's more of your history that I didn't know that now I know. And before we get into Hemingway and some of your and
Yeah.
some of your other research, Trev, let's go ahead and start off with you. Who are you and where are you from, sir?
Good evening, and what a privilege it is to have such an esteemed uh, colleague in the mental health awareness uh, field. What a privilege to be a participant with this podcast with him, and be like a friend of ours who is another doctor as well. Um, Having another global change agent working with us is just empowering to me. It's like, yes, I get to grab right a hold of this thing and go, go, go. So, my name is Trevor Zalstra. I'm formerly a correctional officer in the state of New Mexico and the state of Colorado, and having to deal with people who are on an extreme level of behavioral issues during some of my duties in the housing area. I'll say it was overwhelming at times having to help people who are at just a different level than what your regular society that is on the outside of the walls and fences. They don't grasp the ideations of, or even practically understand it in the littlest bit possible. So I became an accredited CERT operator, which is a correctional emergency response team member in the state of New Mexico with a non-expiration date. And I transferred to the state of Colorado and also ended up working at a mental health facility. So the mental health awareness on these levels, especially in those environments, are crucially important to try to utilize your cognitivity and let your executive functions maximize the best they can, because you're in a constant state of hypervigilance 24/7. Anyways, I'm just privileged once again, my opportunity to be able to be with another global change agent such as Dr. Andy Farah. Wow.
You're
Just
kind.
thank you very much for your time with us tonight, sir.
Oh no, you're very kind, and to be in that environment and to rise above the just the traumas and the pettiness and the distractions, and kind of find the transcendency of life and the connection to other people, no matter what the circumstances. That's amazing work, Trevor. And the fact that you're here. You're not. You know what I mean? You were in the one of these really difficult situations, but that didn't shackle you. You kind of have. To you, it's about the transcendency. It's not about the burdens. It's fantastic. Yeah.
No,
Thank you.
100%.
I was going to say just thank you, doctor, for that compliment of transcendency, because it's another pinpoint and part of this pivoting thing that we have to deal with every day. Um, it's amazing, and I'm I'm really curious about what specific transcendency that you might be discussing or relating to. So you let us know what the topic is that we're going to transcend with, and I'll go right with the flow with you, sir.
You're very kind. Yeah, and the fact is that the world itself, ever since we're little kids, is designed to subtract our spiritual life and to subtract our awareness of the transcendency and the specialness of life and the connectedness to the soul. I can remember being in like third grade and doing math problems and thinking, this is really distracting me from what I really want to think about. And the whole world, I mean, has become an ADD world where there's just this constant again, it's like the shackling. It's like this constant attention away from your own internal grounding. And obviously, the external world, we have to deal with it. But I think that's the problem with modernity, is that it has, again, not only subtracted the spiritual of our lives, but has almost vilified it or mocked it or found it somehow problematic, uh, and made the superficial the primary. And I think that's, again, and I think when I do therapy with folks, it's like, just some basic questions about, what do you daydream about? How do you see yourself in a year? The kind of things that most people go into psychotherapy and they kind of give a list of medications that didn't work, or complain about something. But the bottom line is, yes, I think the whole world has sort of conspired against our spiritual grounding, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
That makes great sense because to me, the dehumanization aspect of modern technology and such, and I'm not saying it's a completely bad thing, but replacing the human connection with artificial connection is really disturbing to me because
Yeah.
I'm in my mid 50s, and I've seen the replacement of people connection to device connection, and it was such a struggling issue for me to understand that it was not a self positive thing for me. So I can totally relate to the things that you're talking about is just like we're not remaining connected with each other in a sense that we can speak and be open with one another, and being replaced by other
Yeah.
things like
And, not
devices.
connected with ourselves in some ways.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. All that distraction. You're right. All this debate about artificial intelligence, because it's such a misnomer. It's not really intelligence. It's just a computer program that very rapidly looks at a lot of information and looks at a lot of patterns and spits out what we expect it to do. And but it has no transcendency. It has no connection. I always tell people, like, we talk in Kevin and I's world, in your world, we talk about medications and blocking this receptor and that receptor. And I see, the brain is like the TV, it's just circuitry, but the signal is coming from somewhere else. You can take apart your TV. You're not going to find the football game or the show you were watching. It's not in there. That signal is somewhere else. The TV is just the tool that communes with the somewhere else. And that's the brain. The brain is just the tool that communes with the somewhere else. And again, one of the mistakes of modernity, mistakes of modern medicine, is to confuse the mind with the brain and think they're synonymous, which they're not. And in fact, anybody who knows neuroscience knows that, okay, a chemical hits a receptor and it causes electrical charge on a neuron. Yeah, that is not thought. That is not emotion. That's a transcendent event that has a neurological footprint, but it's not it's not a transcendent event in the mind. It's occurring somewhere else. And it's so funny too that our field has just reduced people to take this chemical to change that chemical. And you'll meet good docs, who say, okay, met the patient with depression. They've tried Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, certainly. It's like, well, why are they depressed? They won't even tell you the psychological grounding. They just want to go to the neurochemistry, But again, I think that's what we have to get back to, is the understanding that brain and mind are that, again, the brain is a tool. It's not the mind.
No, I definitely would have to agree with you on that one. Too often than not is, I see all the time in the field is, oh, let's just throw this diagnosis on it, or you can only grieve for this long, grief diagnosis, grief disorder for 3 months, and it's like, who am I to sit there and say that, just because this person, lost her or his son to or daughter or whatever, grandchild, to a stabbing or a shooting, right? Who am I to say that they should only grieve for 3 months or 2 months? You see what I'm saying?
Correct.
And I think we're too quick to say this medication should go for this medication needs to fix this medication needs to go here, or hey, you have this diagnosis. Like, I get the importance of medication and diagnosing, but I think it, like you said, it takes us away. Viktor Frankl wrote a book on Man's Search for Meaning, and I definitely love that book because he talks about the essence of maintaining and adapting our hope and meaning and purpose with our experience in life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I think
you really nailed it. Yeah. Yeah. No, you nailed it. I mean, there's no rule book on the human psyche that says you have to grieve 12 days or 10 days or 3 months or something like that. Now, I do understand the idea of drawing a line where you say, okay, normal grieving process at some point, it progresses to depression. We have to draw the line to make a diagnosis, to code something so somebody can get paid or something. But you're absolutely right. There's no rule book on that. And I think that's one of the things you do beautifully in our setting is you meet people where they are. That's just what we have to do. There's nothing cookie cutter about this. And you're absolutely right too about categorizing things. And people forget, categories are very much a function of time and place. If you go back, 2,000 years and you saw schizophrenic, it was demonic possession. Then you zoom ahead 500 years and it was called moral insanity or witchcraft. And then, you come ahead to the 1800s and then people started saying, well, we need to have some better nomenclature about this because what forced that hand was actually the legality. If somebody is psychotic and you have to take away their rights, what does the law say? So then they turn to science to come up with nomenclature to say this is, dementia precox or, whatever it is. And only in the modern times, But again, the that's a fascinating thing is that all diagnoses, whether they're medical or psychiatric, are a function of their time and place, and they change over time, and some fall away, some change names. Something in the 1800s, late 1800s might be called something like that, but they do fall. How is your bipolar today? How is your how's the how's your thorazine? Kind of you've subtracted the human. You've made the diagnosis a identity, and that's not what we want to do. That does kind of subtract again the like I say the going back to transcendent or the connectedness to people. I'd tell you a funny story about that. There was recently a complaint about me. A woman believed that the hospital had stolen some of her possessions. It wasn't true, but she had. In order to file the complaint, she had to put a doctor's name down to complain against, and she put my name down not because I stole her possessions, but because I was the only one who talked to her and was nice to her. And I thought, well, that's a good complaint to have, So at any rate, yeah.
Well, and that goes to show the importance of connecting, right? The genuine human connection versus a non-genuine or non-human connection. I use a lot of artificial intelligence. I use my three primaries. Actually, I just started using a fourth one today, or fourth and fifth one this past week. But I use Grok, I use Centra.ai, I use Apple Intelligence. That's another one.
Mm-hmm.
I use vidIQ and Gemini sometimes. So I've got my little setup for that we use for the running of the podcast, and it actually seems to work pretty well. It does. But here's the catch, right? It doesn't always throw that human emotional connection into verbiage.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't. I have to specify I want it to be more emotional. I want it to be more this. I want it to be more that. And I've gotten it to a point, almost to a T, my whole setup, where it's prompt based, where I can plug in one thing and it just runs with it and it gives me what I'm looking for. But I still have to go through, make sure everything is corrected, make sure this is said, make sure that's said. I still have to double and triple check. And that's the thing, right? That if I screw up with you and I, right, if I say something wrong, you can easily let me know. Artificial intelligence can't tell you that. They can't.
Right.
You can't see how it feels. You can't read how it feels. And so when we think about transcendence of ourselves, like, yes, everything we have are tools, every single thing, but there's more to it than just them being tools.
Yeah.
There's more to this life. The thing about it that I love, and I don't know, I want to get your thoughts on it, and then I'm gonna let Trev ask you the next one. But I think, too often than not, we have this problem where we will, uh, I look at it as getting away from our emotional processing, right? Where we take our kids, grandkids, and all of this, and I believe in the use of these tools, but too often than not, we'll say, "Here, take this and go play with it," or "Hey, take the iPad and go use this," to get the kids and the grandkids out of our hair. Are we really connecting in those moments? You see what I'm saying? I want your thoughts on.
You're right. It's back to the ADD world where, now is it a lot different? When I was a kid, I remember the adults did their thing and the kids did their thing. And, there wasn't a lot as I'm old enough, there wasn't that much, parents didn't read books on how to raise us, and, but you're right, though. This idea of everybody get your distraction so I can get on with what I'm doing is a problem. And I had somebody say that they went to church with their family and they drove back home and everybody was on their phone and they didn't even talk about what they heard in church. I thought, well, that's too bad, And I think that's it. I think when you want to connect to the get your spiritual grounding, going from general to specific, you have to tell yourself, this is important. This is important to me, and you have to carve out time and space. I know just on my ride home, our church is on our way home, and they have this little kind of like a little meditation area with some statues and things. And sometimes it's just okay to pull over there and sit there for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever. And it's okay to be bored. It's okay to be quiet, reflect on things. And again, to carve out time and space. And I think to subtract out the self-critical stuff is very helpful because we all doubt and self-criticism as you go through that process of reading or kind of moving forward spiritually. You don't want to subtract out what you've already done. There's this tendency to think that everything in the past is negated. No, it's helped form who you are. All those times you walked on the beach by yourself or did stuff to kind of connect, that's meaningful stuff, and it got you to where you are. So I think there's a lot that individuals can do, and I think also finding creative outlet, like whether you write poetry or do art or something like that. I think one of the best things you can do is take a poetry class, because it makes, where do those words come from? They come from something in you that you felt was a connection with you or something important. And then you have to really think about, how do I convey that? And somebody actually looks at it and says, why did you pick this word? And why did you put it there? And why'd you put the line break here? And you actually have to think about that process. And that brings you back to that moment of that spark where you said, that's kind of a neat idea for a poem or something, or anything creative, doing something creative. So there's so much to that. What else can you do? I think also reflecting a lot, on your childhood and things that do make you happy. And, Carl Jung was lost in his life. Said, well, what made me happy? And he realized when he was a little kid, building little, like almost not Legos, but something along those lines, building little things made him happy. So he went out in the woods and started building a cabin, So again, just getting back to what your grounding is. And I'm not exactly a Jungian. In fact, I've been accused of being a Freudian, which is just fine, because getting back to our theme, people don't understand Freud at all, because his English translator, every time Freud wrote the word brain, every time he wrote the word soul, his English translator used mind or brain. So he hated the English and American psychiatric interpretations, because he believed that we had medicalized what he thought was a transcendent process. Because Freud himself was about developing your soul. Psychoanalysis was about soul development and self-actualization. So again, think about, if you pick up an English translation of Freud and forget about what Lytton Strachey wrote, basically he wrote it wrong. And every time you see the word brain, you put in soul, it completely changes, the black becomes white, white becomes black. It completely changes your understanding of Freud. He was all about transcendency, way ahead of his time. So at any rate, those are just some of the ideas. And I think I like giving people ways to go from general, to specific. And I think too, your exercise with AI, you're absolutely right. It has subtracted out that human component. And you can tell. We've all been stuck. Like I was writing a paper recently, and I said, okay, Chat GPT, give me a paragraph with references on MTHFR polymorphism and its relation to homocysteine levels and depression. And I spit it out perfectly, but it was like, that's not how I would write it. So I had to go and change it, but it saved me 20 minutes, So we've all done that. And I think that's really the trick is how do you use the tool, not as a substitute for your brain. And I think that's the danger for kids now, is that it subtracts, you and I had to think about how do I research this problem. All they have to do is plug in the problem, right? So that's the danger is they lose the critical thinking of how do I approach this problem rather than, again, it's too easy for them just to let the computer see the question and the problem is already there. So at any rate, bit of a rambling answer, but that's what we're here for.
Well, hold on, Trey, before you go, Dr. Fair.
Yeah.
I'm going to forgive you for being a Freudian. All right. My only problem with Sigmund Freud, okay, and I actually aced the paper, but I literally criticized all of his work. And I was in my undergrad during this time.
Yeah.
Social psychology. And I literally took his whole theory back to the use of cocaine. And I'm like, if it wasn't for cocaine, he would have never come up with this.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Goodness. I suppose he was writing into the I saw that at an auction. Yeah. There was an auction. I do a lot of these online auctions and things and they had a prescription he wrote and just wrote white powder. And I thought, is that legitimate? I suppose it was. He had actually written a prescription for white powder, which would have, and hey, that's sort of it's a normal criticism, right? You think of ketamine now. Ketamine is used for depression. And ketamine is a drug that crosses the blood-brain barrier, causes dissociation. It alters your mental status. And then if you go to people and say, well, you're depressed now, it's like, well, I don't think so. Like if I did cocaine for 2 hours, I wouldn't be depressed either. And I don't know if it's therapeutic, but it certainly changed my cognition, and that's one of the criticisms of the ketamine therapy. In fact, there's a study that blocked the dissociative effect. So they gave people, one group ketamine, they had the psychoactive effect and felt dissociative. Another group got an anesthetic where it blocked they still got the ketamine, but it blocked the feeling of the dissociation and it didn't work. So is that dissociative effect fundamental to the therapeutic benefit, or is it just a fancy placebo where people feel, wow, I had a mind, my mind is different now, right? But yeah, I agree. I think that there was, he had his, that was the times, of course. But again, but go back and reread him and subtract the word brain and put in soul. And it's just, he was talking about something different than we think. He wasn't about illness at all, which is really of course, he was a neurologist, right? But still, he wasn't about illness in these theories. So, yeah.
Well, that's really great that you're bringing up that specific term, neurologist. And I'm kind of going to go out right into from left field into center field with this. I recently, under the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, which is about an hour away north of where I live in Colorado here, underwent with a neuropsychologist and someone who is a clinician out of Canada and moved to America. She was doing the training and gave me an assessment for memory loss. I've never taken it, but because in 2024, in February, I received a fractured skull from a fall and a permanent handicapping condition called a traumatic brain injury, subdural hematomas, 3 large ones. And I'm certain you've heard the term, someone got their bell rung, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that specifically happened to me, and I was dealing with the minimal care because I didn't have any resources. I was unemployed at the time. Things were going really, really down. And when that happened, I knew I had these physical things going on. I got with the TBI group. I have the Center Towards Self-Reliance here in Pueblo, the Pueblo area. I'm in the Pueblo West, but this bell ringing term, I would like to say that it was a transcendence of one way of thinking to a renewed way of thinking in a spiritual sense and an emotional sense, which is still in development. Because the cognitive research that I did for myself told me that the Social Security Administration defines it as a permanent handicap. I tried to get help with that and was denied. So I've like gone through this self process of a transcendence into a new way of thinking and a reconnection of my spiritual self. Um, you said the term, I didn't know Freud was a neurologist. And that's like, wow. Like, Kevin, every time we have an episode, I always say, oh my God, we're really doing another specifically like a custom fit episode for me. This particular one is really amazing. So after the memory assessment test that I took with this younger person that was under the direction of a PhD, at our meeting after to discover what the results were of the memory test that I took, we discussed it for 40 minutes, 40 minutes. And she said, well, Trevor, I just want to congratulate you. I want to say congratulations. You recovered from your traumatic brain injury. And I'm like, what? Am I really going crazy? Did this doctor just tell me I recovered from a traumatic brain injury? I thought this is a permanent. So I don't want to say and discredit her in any way. She's a neuropsychologist. But I remember in the psychology work that I did to earn my high school diploma back in 1993, that I did very well in it, and I got a B second semester, and I was on the national honor roll at that time. And it was disappointing. I'm like, oh man, I got a B in psychology. So for me, the duration of time that's been up to this point, to February of 24, and to be going through what I'm going through now, and to be at where I'm at with actual people dealing with mental health awareness and the troubles and problems, the things that we're going through and that we're discussing tonight, it just is amazing to me to have this opportunity to really be dealing with. And when I was being introduced with you, sir, that what a phenomenal opportunity that I have. And I'm just really blessed by this spiritually, because I'm a very grounded spiritual person. Although you might not think so, because in the 80s, we were 70s and 80s with my hippie parents and becoming a teenager during that time. It was all blowing up into what it is now, the ADD, the attention deficit, like you're talking about. People don't want to pay attention to each other in a regular conversational aspect. So much of this is just a really, really cool discussion. Thank you, Kevin. I hope you're not embarrassed in any way for me exposing my own self that way, or I haven't discredited anyone. I hope not. But for me to go through what I've gone through and what I'm actually going through right now with the minimum amount of care is a spiritual thing, because I'm transcending through the healing of this. I don't really know if I'm healed from my traumatic brain injury, but the PhD says I was. So hey.
Yeah. No, this is an absolutely beautiful story in a lot of ways, because it was your seeking after the transcendency and seeking your spiritual grounding that was a form of mental healing. We know that that one of the we could start at the beginning. Yes, people have severe head injuries and they'll have post-concussive syndrome that can be temporary, but when it is not temporary, and it leads to cell death and a lot of other problems. People have chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And so you're absolutely right. Now, the things that may protect the brain from having residual long-term effects are your genetic predisposition. What's your, there's a chemical called homocysteine, an amino acid in the brain. How high is that? What's your diet like? Is it inflammatory or anti-inflammatory? All the other stressors, fatigue, insomnia make things worse, so forth. So, but the bottom line is, of course, not everybody who has a head injury develops long-term dementia, and some do. They get CTE, like some of our football players or boxers. In fact, what we learned a lot from the recent wars is that people that have blast wave injuries have a real high instance of chronic traumatic encephalopathy because it tends to shear the neurons, the white and gray matter, the sort of the cortical and subcortical in the brain, and that sets you up. And that sort of brings us back to my Hemingway book. And that was, you're much like a Hemingway, that at a young age he had head injuries. And when people started writing about Ernest Hemingway and saying, oh gosh, this guy had, he was an alcoholic, he was a narcissist, and he was a bipolar. Well, first of all, he was probably a moderate drinker by some standards. But he, if I could write Farewell to Arms and Sun Also Rises, and by the time I was 28, I'd be the most narcissistic guy in the world. But the bottom line is, in World War I, he had a severe concussion from a mortar. An Austrian mortar blew up and killed people around him and so forth. But he had that blast wave injury. And of course, he had a lot of shrapnel and machine gun fragments and so forth, was in the hospital a long time. That concussion alone would have set him up for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. But he had a head injury in Paris. He had a skylight fall on him. He went into the bathroom drunk and pulled the cord to flush the commode, was pulling on the skylight, which had a cord on it. And of course, it was already broken and fell down and hit his head. He had a car wreck in London during the Blitz, and his head went into the windshield. He required 57 stitches. He had another two head injuries in World War II in France. Anti-tank round from a German patrol sent him off of a motorcycle sidecar, and he hit his head on a boulder. So he had two injuries there, the blast wave and the direct blow. He later fell from the flybridge of his boat and hit one of those clamps that holds he had another head injury basically on his boat. He had another car crash in Cuba. And in Africa, he had two plane crashes. So by the time this man was in his early mid-50s, he had 9 major concussions. He'd boxed his whole life and played football in high school with a leather cap on his head. So what people thought was a bipolar condition or a severe depression was actually a dementia in the form of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And that's what sort of propelled his demise. When he got his shock therapy at Mayo Clinic, it accentuated his decline rather than prevented it. So we've learned a lot. In fact, when Hemingway was going to Mayo Clinic, they didn't recognize post-concussive syndrome or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, but they did recognize dementia pugilistica, which is when boxers would get, like you said, got their bell rung and got it rung multiple times. And as they said, had their brains scrambled in the ring. And Hemingway wrote a story, and one of the Nick Adams stories is called The Battler, about Ad Wolgast. It was really about Ad Francis was his protagonist, but he's based on Ad Wolgast and Oscar Nelson, who were two boxers who were well known for their CTE. So they had the basic dementia pugilistica from boxing. So here's Hemingway writing a story in his 20s about boxers that gets, CTE, not knowing he himself would one day get the same thing. But the doctors in his day called it accident neuroses. They would say, well, these patients that have been in car wrecks, and they had claimed head injuries, and they complain they had headaches and dizziness and double vision, and they're non-functional. These people are just neurotics. They're just seeking attention. Is called accident neuroses. They didn't even recognize it then. So it was discarded. But you're absolutely right. There are things we can do now. In Hemingway's time, they thought, well, you have psychotic depression, we'll give you shock therapy, not recognizing that, yeah, he had psychosis, he had depression, but he had CTE, and he had a little bit of, maybe a little alcoholic dementia thrown in, a little vascular dementia from untreated hypertension and diabetes. But long story short is nowadays, you're right, you're out of the woods. And what's remarkable is you got through your testing, and she said, hey, you test out as somebody who doesn't have post-concussive syndrome. You have recovered. That is a dream come true. Now, but the seeds are there, and the things to do now are, believe it or not, there. This has been well studied. How can we know that people have had, let's say, even if you'd never had that, let's say you say, gee, my mom had dementia, my dad had dementia. What can I do to protect myself? It's the same neuroprotective measures that we would use for somebody who's had head injury. We use that same type thing. If you just, I would say, my mom's had strokes, my dad had Alzheimer's. What can I do to protect my brain? And by the time somebody's, our age, you got to start taking omega-3s, antioxidants, folate, B12 in the methylated forms. CoQ10 doesn't hurt. Curcumin, but it's got to be thera-curcumin, much more potent, and microdose lithium. And in fact, microdose lithium has been shown to actually, when somebody starts getting plaques of Alzheimer's, after 6 months of taking lithium, it can actually start dissolving those plaques. But that's the same formula. And I wrote about this for years, and various companies have come up with little compounds. And the one that kind of encapsulates everything is called Luma TC, or LUMA. Luma theracumin is the TC. So it has all the right ingredients. So it's designed specifically for someone who's had any head injury or any risk of dementia. Just take one a day, and you've done everything you can now to protect your brain from getting that. A lot of the pro athletes take it, a lot of the hockey players, a lot of football players, and believe it or not, the baseball players have one of the better concussion protocols, which they have the less likelihood than football, of course, but they have a really good, preventative measures, and the NBA does as well. So yeah, there are things to be done now to protect the brain still going forward, because that trauma itself just kind of plants that seed, of risk. So you're right. This was designed for you, Trevor. Thank God for you. I'll get you that information. But I take it. I think everybody should take that. I've have, when you read your own family history, it's kind of terrifying when you think of all the things that family members have had, So, but again, yes, there are things to do. But you're absolutely right that you've really beat the odds. It's wonderful that, and I think that the key was, probably good living and exercise and all the right things. But again, that's that. How do you say, the neuronal networks, the spiritual, the aesthetic experiences. When you see that, when you tune into that stuff, it's healing. It does have, it's positive for the body, of course, positive for the brain. And that probably pulled you over that line of saying, okay, now you don't have the deficits. It's just wonderful. It's a beautiful story.
Yes, it did. It most certainly did. You provided a huge amount of information to everyone, and the discussion. I just want to make certain that it wasn't intentionally to try to focus it on me, but it gave me an opportunity to share what my experience had been. And I appreciate Kevin, and both of you. Like, you guys are the professionals. I'm just like the regular guy. So I kind of saw an opportunity. I kind of got in there. Thank you for sharing everything you have so far with us.
Wonderful.
But
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And the old idea that neurons are, once they're gone, they're gone. You can't grow new ones. Well, that's not true with the brain. The brain is, we have brain derived neurotropic factor. We have a brain that is meant to um, recircuit. You can grow new pathways, and you can, again, we're just talking about the hardware, not the software. But the software propels the development of the hardware, I believe. So you're absolutely right about that. It's interesting too that people that have had a lifelong spiritual focus have had, that accentuation of that pathway formation. And you know what? When it's similar to the aesthetic experience, because you'll meet people who are not particularly spiritual, but they may have that, they may be, in the creative world or in the aesthetic world, they're kind of the same. Aesthetic and spiritual kind of light up the same areas, if you will, in the brain. So it's okay. You can, we all have friends who are not particularly, you know, they may even be in a lot of denial about the spiritual aspect of their life, but they still may have some aesthetic appreciation, and that's okay. That works too. Yeah. Oh yeah, email is the best. Yeah. The phone has become used. I get mostly spam calls, so most of the calls you get ignored. But email is the best. That bfarah at navanthealth.org is the best way. BFAREH at navanthealth.org. Yeah, it's the best way. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, one of the biggest things I would certainly like to say is just how privileged and humbly thankful and grateful this specific episode once again. What a great resource to be able to make a short connection with for temporarily, even just for our podcast, but for those out there that are going through things that they may not understand. Hopefully we've been able to express a good conversation, grounded firmly. We talked about many things about spirituality and Freud and Hemingway and all these things. Um, in my personal experience, what a crazy, awesome, cool episode. Um,
Yeah.
During the podcast, since the beginning of it, we've always asked the guests of a call to action about what they think that they would say to anyone around the globe that is going through any issues that they want to deal with. Is there a call to action that you would recommend them to do specifically to help them transcend into a different thinking of what they are normally used to?
That's so beautiful. Yeah. And like I say, I'm honored. Your story was just beautiful. Like I said, you shared and you've helped so many people just by sharing your story. It's amazing. I'm the one who's honored. But yes, that's such a great question, because I think so many people have this silent angst and they're just filled with self doubt and self criticism. And I remember treating one guy who was very super guy, wealthy guy, extremely successful. And he said, and he was talking about his depression. He said, "You mean most people don't think about killing themselves every day?" And I said, "No, this is not the way." So most people had no idea that this guy was just suffering, and to subtract out, we have enough stuff from the world coming at us. We don't need our own self doubt, and to subtract out even people that are just negative to you and that bring you down. You don't need that. So I think the first message is to change that internal. And when you have that negative thought, you've got to change it to a positive. I just Kevin was talking about helping folks. One gentleman came to me and wanted me to help him edit a book, and he was writing a book. It was a good idea, and he was kind of struggling with it. And his wife came in and everything. And I remember when he said, what do you think? I said, I'm so jealous of you. You're so lucky. I said, you have somebody, his wife was so supportive and so positive. I'm like, you're going to be a success. You have someone there continually subtracting your self-doubt and boosting you up, and I thought that's a wonderful position to be in. But I think that's it. I think that it starts internally. And you just never know what somebody is. Well, Kevin, you're right. You never know what somebody's going through. I think that's one thing about Kevin's clinical practice. I've never seen him say a negative thing about anybody, or negative. He meets people where they are, and he understands, where they're at. And I think we all have to see that in each other too. But yeah, I think that those are kind of off the top of my head what I would do. And I just thank you again for sharing your story.
Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Farah.
Yeah.
And I send it right back to you, Big Ben. Thank you very much for being with us today. We appreciate you so very much.
Great.
Absolutely.
Well, like I say, it's an honor. Yeah, it's an honor.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you guys are the best. All right.